This video is to show you how to get started in ROXAS. First, I'm going to go over a few materials that you'll need if you want to properly date images in ROXAS. So what you'll be using most of the time will be usually, if you wanted to make it in Excel, an Excel sheet that lists all of the dates for all of the images that you'll be dating for each sample. So in this Excel sheet I have all the white bark pine samples from sample 17 to 30. There are 90 something white bark pine samples, so I have them in little snippets so you don't have to go back and forth within these tabs. And within each sample, all of these images, all these subsections, and then images that were extracted from the subsections. And then I went through and dated each of the images starting with the outer partial ring year, which is what you will input into ROXAS, and then the inner partial ring year, which you will check to make sure matches in ROXAS to this Excel sheet. If you want to know how these dates were acquired, typically you scan your sample first, either in Epson or in Skippy, some sort of imaging program. You're going to date it in QRecorder or WinCell, whatever you have, or WinDendro. QRecorder seems to be the most popular because of how inexpensive and user-friendly it is. So this has already been dated, and this is sample 27.1. So that's what we were looking at in the Excel sheet. But it's going to be really difficult to kind of know where your sample images that you'll be looking at in ROXAS kind of line up in here in this scan of just like the plain wood surface. So there are, when you are processing your wood anatomy microscope labs, you'll have preview images that pop up that show where your image has been extracted from in the sample. And it typically looks like this. So this is your subsection, one of the sections of the samples that you cut up, typically about an inch long. And then these are the images that have been extracted, these polygons here, rectangles. I labeled the sheet. I did print this out. There's not really an automated way to do this. People are working on it, but I don't think it really exists yet. So I labeled this as this subsection, and then these images that were extracted. So this one in the middle is 27.1 _5 _2. And this is how all the images are going to be labeled when you're extracting images. This is done in Zen, which is part of Zeiss, the program that you would scan your microscope slides into. And then I date them. I usually go by increments of 5 years because it's easier to kind of look at when I'm also going through and finding out what year this image starts with. So this would be the outermost partial year. And I also sometimes put notes to let myself know that I am counting this little sliver here, and that's when I need to input 1375 and make sure that I create a ring boundary here. All the way down to the innermost partial ring, which in this case for this first image, _1 would be 1332. So if you see notes in this Excel sheet, say tiny corner sliver, ignore few 1558 cells, those are notes to let you know what year you're looking at and what ring you're looking at. I also, as like a side note, and anytime you do wood anatomy, you want to be aware of the types of information that you can glean from it that you can't get with any other type of dendrochronological technique. And that's like blue rings, sometimes frost rings. So I always go through and also note the blue rings and frost rings because they're really easy to identify from the preview image. So, and then I upload all of these preview notes into my folder so that I can go back and look at them if I need to. I also have all my QWA here, images here, all my Skippy images here. Going to QWA, have all of your Excel sheets here, and the dates. So that is how you get started. It's always good to have all this already done before you start with ROXAS, because with ROXAS to date years in that program, you need to already have a reference reference year file for all of the measurements you've already made in either Curvature or whatever program you use to measure the initial years or initial sample. So I already have this file here with all of my measurements made in Curvature. So those are all of my Engelmann spruce and all of my white bark pine. So 27.1 is already in there. And when I date each image from each subsection in ROXAS, it'll line up the years that I give it with these measurements and make sure, and it ensures that it's going to be dated correctly. So once you have all of that information, you will need two programs, not just ROXAS. ROXAS, unfortunately, one of the only downfalls of ROXAS at the moment, which they're working on, is that it has to be run with Image Pro Plus. This is an older version of Image Pro Plus, 6.0. I think it's up to like 7.0 now. And some people have, like Matt has like a different version of it that's like slightly different. So you'll want to open Image Pro Plus and then ROXAS. This version of ROXAS is 3.0.67. I thought it was 6.5.5, but this is the most recent version that I got from Georg about a month ago. So now you're going to start working on images, editing images in ROXAS. You'll have your Excel sheet down here with your dates ready. You'll have Image Pro Plus open, and then ROXAS, this is version 3.0.67. You might have a different version, but this is the latest version as of June of 2025 that I got from Georg about a month ago. And a couple of other videos, just like two of them, I actually videoed them when I had version 3.0.1. It is a little different, so just be aware of that with like the video on curvature and the video on like compression wood, which are really short and not focusing on how to do certain things with like certain tools. It's mostly just when you encounter anomalies in the wood. So there's already going to be, if you have gotten your images that have been processed already in ROXAS AI, it'll already have a configuration that's associated with it. In this case, we're using white bark pine, which can be really applied to most conifers. Not all of them, but with pine and spruce it works. This is a configuration from NATF 2019. So if it's already highlighted, then it's already associated. Don't mess with it. I would stay with this this selection for cell lumen wall or cell lumen only, not lumen and wall. You can change that once you're in ROXAS if you're sure that you're done completely with editing an image. But if you want to go in and out of the image, stick with this because otherwise it's going to take a lot longer to close. You will go into image selection. This is already popping up to what I was working on earlier, but otherwise you'll just go to the folder where you have all of your images that have been processed with ROXAS AI. It'll have all of the images that are associated with each extraction. Don't ever click on these. You'll know if you do, if you accidentally click on this one, because it looks a lot like this first one, which this first one is the one you need to click on, except it has underscore annotated. If you click on that, it will, well, I'll just show you what happens. It'll say that it hasn't ever scanned this one before. There's no corresponding spatial calibration, which is the Pinus albicollis 2.2675 that we were looking at earlier. You'll go ahead and cancel and get out of it because that's not what you're supposed to do. It doesn't hurt anything, just get out of ROXAS, go back into it, click on the correct image. If you click on the correct image, then what will pop up will be a little window that says that the sample has been analyzed before. Always say yes. If you say no, it happens, you might accidentally click no by accident. Just exit out of it, go back into it. It's not going to erase anything. It'll load the existing analysis from ROXAS AI. Usually only takes about 5 to 10 seconds. Sometimes it says that it takes a lot longer than that. I don't know why. Like 29 seconds. That clearly was not 29 seconds, but whatever. So you press OK, and you are now in ROXAS. So I chose this sample because it has like 12 to 13 rings, so it's not going to be super crazy, and it has a couple of examples of things that you might need to do if you come across this in images, which is pretty often. I made this task list, and this always does this when I'm recording. I made this task list to kind of help until you get used to just knowing what you need to look for, or remembering what you need to look for when you're going through and editing these images. You can do this in any order, really, that you want to. It's just the order that I typically go in. The first thing we're going to go over are ring boundary editing tasks. So the first one is deleting wrong boundaries. A lot of times with images that have just been run through ROXAS AI, an incorrect ring boundary will appear at the top of the image that you need to automatically delete. That didn't happen with this image, which is nice, probably because this boundary didn't get drawn. The most recent images that have gone through ROXAS AI have been really incredible at drawing ring boundaries. I think when I showed this to you and Zachary back in March, I was saying that you would have to draw the majority of your ring boundaries, and that's not really the case anymore, so that's really nice. I actually think Mark Katzenmeier came out with a paper in Dendrochronologia, I think it was maybe Dendrochronologia, like 2 weeks ago that Georg sent out, so that's really exciting. He did a really fantastic job. No idea how he does it, but in the end, we don't have to draw basically hardly any ring boundaries. Even some of these that are only partial ring boundaries in the image, a lot of times they get drawn as well. So we'll go through and make sure that there aren't any ring boundaries that are incorrect that need to be deleted. This also, I put in the task list that this also includes ring boundaries that might be in the right place but have too many errors in them that it would take too long to correct, and you would, in most cases, I would just go ahead and delete it because it's going to take a lot less time to just redraw the boundary. If you feel differently and you think that it will take less time correcting the boundary, then keep it. Another thing you want to look for is, and I already looked through this image before starting this video and it's not here. It was in my last image like 3 times, so that would have been a great example. But you know that you have one ring boundary along this ring boundary right here, because you have 1 year right here and 1 year in the next. Sometimes you'll see a year right here, a year over or near the ring boundary, and then another year, and that's a really great indicator that you have a double boundary here. There are a couple of other quality checks that will indicate you have a double ring boundary somewhere, like with the plot reference series later, but that's what I look for when I'm going through an image or scrolling through, is I'm looking for where I see an extra year here, which might tell me that it accidentally drew 2 boundaries. That happens like every other image. So there aren't any to delete. So the next thing we want to do is to correct any boundaries with small issues. I don't think there are going to be any. I'm still going to show you how to do that. And then to draw missing boundaries. So it doesn't look like there are a lot of issues, maybe down here. So these last two late weight cells didn't get included. It's not a big deal, but it is something that I feel like Georg would point out, and it's a good example to use. I really dislike having to edit boundaries at the edge of the image because the very last point of this boundary is way off, so you have to kind of pull it in. So this will pop up. I move this out of the way, and I always love that Obama reference. It makes me happy, especially right now. And then click on the pointer tool, and then click on the ring boundary that you want to edit. you'll see crosshairs, and that is to just edit that singular point. If you see the hand, it means you move the whole ring boundary. So to get to this point over here and correct it, I have to move this whole ring boundary in. Just be careful when you're doing that, that you know where to put it back. Otherwise that could get awkward. Like what I'm dealing with right now. Well, that looks about right. And maybe zoom out to make sure there isn't any issues here. And this one can be brought up so that those cells aren't included. And with this newer version, which it doesn't say it up here, but this is using ROXAS 3.0.655, you can edit or correct multiple ring boundaries and not have to close this out every time. With ROXAS 3.0.1, which I was using for a couple of weeks, that wasn't the case, and it took a lot more time to correct ring boundaries because I had to close it out and then open it up every time or it would mess up. So I'm not seeing a lot, and I'll probably not do much else with this. Sometimes it might look like a ring boundary is kind of up, like a little further up more than it needs to be. I see that less now with the new ROXAS AI, but I saw it a lot like last year when I was editing images. So you can adjust that and make sure that all that last row of latewood cells aren't being excluded. So not a lot to edit. Just make sure, I mean, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but if you see especially like something, for example, like that, which is not going to be that extreme, just make sure like these little spikes, just to kind of make sure there aren't a lot of them, or most of them are corrected. And then after you're done, you'll just press OK. And I didn't have to delete any boundaries, so I didn't have to press update outlines, but every time you edit any boundary, just go ahead and press update outlines. In the past with other ROXAS versions, if you don't do that often enough, it can kind of get messy. It might accidentally create a ring boundary that shouldn't be there, or it'll make create spikes in ring boundaries that were already drawn. It'll erase boundaries for no reason if it gets overwhelmed, so just make sure you press update outlines a lot so you have the most up-to-date years. So we corrected those, and now we'll draw this last one that's missing. We'll go to draw missing borders, pull that to the side, and this time this is your, I think it's like create a polygon, but it's just like drawing a line tool. It's good to zoom in when if you have a space here, just kind of estimate maybe like 1 or 2 points, but you don't have to have a lot of points. Georg recommends that you have a point per cell like this. So each space between 2 points is the size of or width of a cell. I go a little faster than that sometimes, and I zoom in and out when I'm doing this. There is a way to not have to zoom in and out, where you can use your arrows on your keyboard, but I don't do that. If you have that, that's really good. If you want to know more about that, I can give you the text file that Georg supplied. It's something that goes on your desktop and enables you to use the keys on your keyboard, those arrows. But I don't do that. I just zoom in and out, which hopefully doesn't make anyone dizzy. Alright, so I drew that. When you get to the end of a ring boundary, I did that without thinking, double click. And when you double click, you will end the boundary line. If you accidentally click again, as long as you double click with your second point, it's not a big deal. It'll erase it and it'll tell you that when you close out of this tool. If you have more than 2, it's going to create a boundary line. You'll just have to delete it. It shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't combine with any other ring boundaries and mess them up and make you have to redraw them. So yeah, it's telling me that it's going to delete that one, which it does. and then it's going to stay like that until I press Update Outlines, and then it's going to go all the way across the screen. So technically I don't really have to draw this part into space. I could just start here and go all the way to here. I don't know why I've never thought of that before. And then I'll just draw it straight across, but I kind of like to be in more control of where this line goes. So now I have to delete, is this going to happen? Okay, yeah. So if you are using the delete wrong borders tool and you press or click 3 times and you don't hit a boundary, it'll close you out of the tool. It's not a big deal, just go back into the tool, but sometimes you have a little bit of trouble doing that. I've had trouble doing that when the ring boundary forms way up here at the top of the image. It's kind of hard to get to. I don't know if that's really the case with this version of ROXAS. With the last one, I had that issue a couple times and it was really, it caused some problems. So you just press continue, remember to press update outlines again. And that is one of the last things you need to do. So looking at the task list, then you want to put in your gear, your outermost partial ring gear, which I need to put in here. So and you'll put that where it says outmost gear right here. And you should have like an Excel sheet. I don't have it open. Oh, I do have it open, good. I printed it out too so that I wouldn't have to keep going into this Excel sheet here. But we are on, I believe it's 3733. So I have all of these Excel sheets already made, and it has the outer partial ring year and the inner partial ring year. I had the outer full year because with the last version of ROXAS 3.01 that I was using, it changed from inputting the outer partial year to inputting the outer full year, and then it just deleted all the cells in this outer partial ring year. Now it's gone back to, with this newer version, back to using the outer partial ring year. It's a thing I'm going through right now. So some of the samples in these Excel sheets will have this blue column because I started inputting that column when I thought that we would have to actually use this year. We don't anymore. If you're using 3.0.655, you'll be using this outer partial ring year. So just ignore this column. So we're on 3733, so our outermost partial year will be 1915, and the innermost year will be, partial ring year will be 1903. So we'll put in 1915 and update outlines. It should automatically update. And 1903, you can't see it, but you see 1904 here. And 1903 is this last one. It's way up here. So we know that all of these dates line up with what I dated in the preview images, which I think, Matt, you and I did that at NADEF 6 years ago. Or maybe that, yeah, no, that was Will and I think. I don't know. It took a long time. I remember that. And another way you can make sure that all of these years line up with at least what we have measured, and in this case what I measured in Curvature is using this plot reference ring width series, but I'm going to do the cells first and go over those before we get, because that's usually the last thing I do before I calculate output. Quick, something that Georg pointed out a while back that is important to remember when you're drawing your ring boundaries or correcting them is how the ring boundaries are drawn around resin ducts. So in these two cases, it's pretty clear that the resin ducts don't really mess with the end of the ring boundary. It's in the lightwood or somewhat in the lightwood, but not on like the edge of the boundary at the periphery. In this case, this resin duct is, and these two I've already lassoed cells and deleted the epithelial cells surrounding the resin duct. This one I haven't yet. So this is one where you want to be careful with and zoom in. Now when I do lasso this one, I will probably take all these epithelial cells, and honestly it'll become kind of a moot point. When you do that, take a big circle and get rid of these cells that are adjacent or touching the resin duct. which is what you should be doing, especially with white bark pine or pine in general. These will all be deleted, so it doesn't really matter where this boundary goes. If you didn't delete these out here, though, you would need to make sure that you corrected this boundary so that it included these cells right here that appear to be part of the late wood. But honestly, this one kind of looks like it's in the late wood, but these two honestly look like epithelial cells or parenchyma. So just be careful with that, especially when there are curves. But it's totally acceptable. For instance, these down here where these cells around this resin duct have been deleted, so you can go ahead and just draw the ring boundary straight across the resin duct. But that's only in the case of these epithelial cells or cells around epithelial cells being deleted. So I'm going to do the delete lasso cells tool. This is probably the tool I use the most when I'm editing cells. Well, that helps. So lasso and delete anomalies. Resin ducts is what you're going to be deleting the most. I'll have another video with just doing frost rings and then problem areas like blade issues, which we will see in this image here. We don't see any resin ducts yet because this is Engelmann spruce and they're few and far between, luckily. Unlike white bark pine or pine in general where they're everywhere. So you're going to go a lot faster editing cells, at least resin ducts, when you're going through Engelmann spruce. So click on delete lasso cells. In an earlier version of ROXAS, and I mention this a lot because it might be something that you're used to if you used an earlier version of ROXAS, but it would have me click on this polygon tool here, create polygon feature, before I could actually do it. I don't know if it automatically clicks on that now with this version or older versions, but with 3.0.1 at least, it made me click that first. So if your version has you do that, make sure you click this create polygon feature tool first, move that out of the way, and then start lassoing. This is going to be the same idea as split cells. There are different ways to do this, but the way I prefer to do it is I will hold down the left cursor and circle or lasso what I want to delete. Everything within this circle is going to be deleted. And then I right click, it turns green, so it closes it and creates a closed polygon. If you encircle something that you didn't mean to encircle, and I'll show a couple of examples of this in a minute, you can do undo, redo last action. When you do that, though, you're going to undo everything you've done in this step. So if you've lassoed like 15 resin ducts and you accidentally lasso a bad one, or one that isn't a resin duct or something, and you want to undo it, you're going to undo all 15 of them. So be careful with that. But it is a very helpful tool if you do something like I'm about to show. So if you have, a lot of times there are resin ducts, let's see if there's one in here. I'll need to delete that. Sometimes, yeah, there's a resin duct that is right on the edge of the image. And so you have to get really close to the image, and you would think that you could just hold down your left cursor and circle this whole thing and hit this border of the image here, and everything would be fine, and that's not the case. What's going to happen is you're going to hit this edge, and it's going to do that. And I don't know why it does that, but it's going to erase everything that that line touches. And if you make a really big border hit this and you have this huge chunk of this ring get erased, you'll need to undo what you did. And every once in a while the undo last action tool doesn't work. It's happened once or twice where I did something like this and I wasn't able to undo it. So just try to avoid doing that. I'll avoid it by getting really close to the edge, going around whatever feature I'm trying to lasso and delete, and then get close again, and then right click, so it does this. You've got this border right here, this green line that ROXAS automatically creates because it's going to erase any cell that's outside of this border. So you don't have to worry about getting really close to the edge. ROXAS already takes care of that for you, so just don't hit that. Otherwise, just make sure with resin ducts to try to get all the epithelial cells, any cells that look unusual, abnormal, because of the presence of the resin duct you want to get rid of. You can even lasso in if you like had a couple of cells or polygons that ROXAS thought were cells over here in this ray. You can reach over and grab that as you're encircling the resin duct. In Engelmann spruce, or spruce in general, which Matt knows this already, but the resin ducts are a lot smaller. They're much more compact. They're not kind of all over the place the way they are in pine, because their epithelial cell walls are much thicker than the cell walls in pine. I don't know why that's one of my favorite fun facts, but it makes it a lot easier to get rid of or encircle and delete resin ducts in spruce. So I like working, I've found that I've enjoyed working with spruce a lot more because there's a lot less I have to edit. And yeah, you will do that. And another fun thing is, like I mentioned before, is you don't have a lot of resin ducts. If you see any blade issues like this, that's not really actually a blade issue, but sometimes you'll see a blade issue because it's going across the image. In this case, it looks like the thinner early wood cell walls just aren't holding up, and probably because they weren't completely embedded in paraffin. So the secondary walls, or all of the walls, are getting sliced up as slices or micro slices are being taken. So if a lot of times ROXAS can account for that and it's fine, but of course if the walls are completely cut up, it's not going to be able to account for that much. But even here, you can see these secondary walls came off, and it still did an okay job in making a cell, or estimating what the cell would have looked like if the secondary wall hadn't been torn out. So there's a lot of that here. You don't have to do that for every time you see like the cells messed up, but that one looks like a blade right there. That's a blade issue. But if you see a lot of them, I would go ahead and start trying to erase them. That one does look okay. Here's not so great. More blade issues, possibly. Sometimes it's really clear, sometimes it's not. It might be a mixture of the two. This sample in general, I've already been working 47, and it's not, I'm only in the second image and it's not great yet. I'm a little concerned I'm not going to be able to use it. And this is the same one that I do the split cells with, because we're having a lot of issues, or I'm having a lot of issues with cells, multi-cells being created by ROXAS in this sample. So this one isn't looking too great, but just get as much as you can. I'm not grabbing everything that I probably would want to, because I want to finish this video. But that is basically what you do with lassoing cells. You press OK, it's going to take a minute. This is probably the tool that will take the longest to process when you're trying to get out of it. So just give it a minute, then give it an extra minute, because it'll look like it's done and it's not, and it'll freeze up ROXAS if you try to switch to a different tool and it's not done processing the cells you're trying to delete with the delete lasso cells tool. So give it a minute, let it go, and then it'll be fine. So now I'm going to show you how to do a pretty simple task, which is just deleting individual cells. In another part of this video, I show how to split cells, especially when you have cells. Of course, I'm not going to see one now, but when you have like multiple cells clumped into one, and how to split those. Sometimes, and I'm not sure how much, but sometimes that could affect the cell wall thickness measurements. So sometimes I like to delete them and then go back in and redraw them if I need to. But mostly, that's only with like images like this one where they're a little messier and ROXAS can't quite pick up, like these down here, where exactly, because it's a little faded here, so ROXAS thinks this is one big cell. But usually when you're using the delete click cells tool, it's to delete areas in the rays where ROXAS thought there was a cell, but it's actually like something that looks like a bordered pit, but things that they pick up, usually circular objects that look like cells. I would want to delete things like this over here too, just like anomalies. I might want to circle this with or grab this with like the delete lasso cells tool, but if I miss it, I could just grab it with the delete click cells. It also, this tool takes a lot less time to process than this tool, the lasso tool. So sometimes it's easier. Something that I recommend doing that I wouldn't do with delete lasso cells, but I would with delete click cells, is to fill the cells instead of looking at just the outlines. It makes it a lot easier to know what you need to delete. So you go into Edit Options and Utilities, and then the Style of Cell Outlines, and then click that bar to go down and click Filled. The only reason why I don't have filled cells all the time, which I used to when I first started using ROXAS a few years ago, but I stopped because it slows the program down a lot. So you only want to use this sporadically, or when you absolutely have to, because it's going to have to reload or refill them every time you zoom in or out or move the screen at all. So I'm going to start at the top, and it does this. It lags a lot. If you zoom in, because it doesn't have as many cells it has to refill, it doesn't lag nearly as much, so I would recommend staying in like a zoomed in section of the image while you're editing it with the cells filled. So we're going to do delete click cells, and again, the primary purpose, at least for our project, when using the delete click cells tool, is to remove any accidental selections within the rays. But since, and I've said this probably in other parts of the video, since ROXAS AI came about, that's not really an issue anymore. Even when there are selections or false cells in the rays, there aren't enough to affect any kind of measurements. So I would only do it as if you see a lot of it. But in this case, we're going to be looking at the rays, but then also looking where we have multiple cells that are clumped into one. And like this one looks like it's clumped into one when you're zoomed out, so you have to be kind of careful with that. So if you have like this one, so if you have a lot of normal cells, typically the way the algorithm, I believe, works with ROXAS is that the rest of this ring is going to look pretty okay. We'll check it anyway. This one, because this part doesn't look that great, the rest of it probably isn't going to either. I can't tell you what happened with this one because a lot of the rest of this image looks all right. But this looks very out of focus, which could have been what happened, but we're going to have to do a lot of deleting here. Again, sometimes I delete or I split cells. It depends on how many split cells there are, how bad the split cells, or how bad the clumping is. And then I'll go back in and either redraw them if I have deleted them, or if I only have to delete a few and there are enough cells left to get good measurements from, I might just leave it or only redraw a few of them. As long as you can get a good chunk of these cells that, or cell selections that aren't correct and will mess up your measurements potentially later, then that's really what's important. So this is with this ring in particular, which is a bit messy because of the image, not because of ROXAS, if Keurig listening. And I'm also deleting anything that, any remnants of or selections that don't fill the cell completely. It doesn't have to be perfect. I have been told by Georg that I have in the past tended to overdo it when deleting cells, so I try not to do that as much anymore. Not only because I don't want to affect the measurements, but because it's a waste of time and energy. And if you don't have to do it, you shouldn't do it. If you're doing any kind of QWA project, it's probably going to be a waste of time to put extra effort into deleting something like what I literally just did that isn't going to affect the measurements. So I'm just going through and looking for things in the rays, and also looking for another ring that might have an abundance of these like double or multiple cells that are clumped in together. Again, I've said this multiple times with this project, we're more focused on the late wood, although I know that there are parts of our project that are going to also be focused on other traits that include the early wood, so that's going to be important. And I just clicked outside of this line. This is a border line, by the way, so everything outside this green line is going to be deleted, so I really didn't need to do that. But I'm used to doing it, so I did it anyway. So that ring didn't really have much going on in the late wood. If you see anything in the early wood, you can grab it, but honestly, there's more early wood than late wood, so we're more focused on perfecting the late wood than we are the early wood in this case. So the rest of this is looking better. That one's clearly needs to be deleted. And just started raining really hard. Hopefully that doesn't come across in the video. Especially if you see multiple cells like this, like a lot of times you're going to see two cells that are clumped together, but when you see these more than two cells clumped together, go ahead and delete that, or really don't pick that at all. That could potentially mess up measurements. Although Georg might disagree. He's the expert on this, but I go ahead and remove them just because I want it to look the best, especially if it's near the late wood. Just go ahead and get rid of it. Other than that, this tool is really simple to use. I've actually spent more time on it than I really should have. And again, before ROXAS AI was a thing, thanks Mark and Georg, this tool was used a lot more. Now it's not really, it's used pretty briefly. Only in images like this do you actually use it more than you would with most images, especially if the images are taken correctly. But I don't think I mentioned this before, this image in particular, the sample that it came from is extremely old. It's like 1,200 years old, so it actually looks really good for how old it is. It also came from a remnant, which is sometimes really hard to get a really good image from. So not only is it a pretty good sample that's been taken with the microscope slide, ROXAS AI did a really fantastic job processing it as well. So once you're done, go ahead and press continue. Again, it doesn't take as long as the delete lasso cells tool did or does. And then as soon as it's done, which you want to give it a second, don't push it. You could freeze up ROXAS, and if you click enough times when it's still processing, it could crash ROXAS. It hasn't really done that in the new version really at all, but in the old version it did it often. I just don't like to press the buttons of ROXAS too much. Once it's done, go ahead and get out of the filled cell, go back to outlines, it's much quicker, and then go back through, zoom in and out if you need to, and then refill any cells if you feel like too many cells were deleted within a ring, and that's it. And real quick, as I mentioned before, this is a much more complicated, many more anomalies in this image than your average image. Typically, you're just going to want to look at the rays, and I would recommend when you're doing that to kind of start in a corner, like down here in this corner, and zoom in one or two clicks, maybe just one. Usually when you're doing all of the other tasks for an image, you already get kind of an idea of how many incorrect selections there are for cells, and you might have seen one or two in the rays, you might have not seen any. So depending on what you've seen so far as you're going through the image and editing it, once you get to the point where you want to delete click cells, you already kind of know how hard you need to look for them. So if there are a lot of them, you need to look more carefully. If you haven't really noticed any, there probably aren't any. But I typically start in the corner, and then I'll go up and follow the cells, and usually again I have these filled. I'll go ahead and do that really fast again. and I watch the rays just kind of in the periphery and look for little anomalies like this where I want to deselect them. A lot of times it feels a bit subjective because you'll have rays that emerge and then disappear again, and it's not the ray actually ending, it's just how it's emerging and or manifesting in this image. And so sometimes you'll have a pretty clear ray like this, and then it kind of turns into cells, and you don't always know when you need to stop deleting or when the cell is inappropriate or if it's actually correct. In this case, I would say like it's not, but then it kind of goes away right here. But sometimes it will, like if we go up a bit, like this one kind of looks like the emergence of a ray, or this one does, and then you go into and then it becomes cells. And once you actually see like cells within the ray, like actual with shapes and cell walls, then that's probably when you need to stop clicking. Also, if you accidentally click a cell, and you can click it again and it'll come back. I mentioned that because in version 3.0.1, once you click a cell and delete click cells, it goes away and you can't re-click it and bring it back. So if you're using that version, you're not going to be able to bring it back once you click it, so don't accidentally click something. Though honestly, if you accidentally click one cell incorrectly, it's not going to really affect anything. But if you do it multiple times, then maybe. So yeah, I'll go up looking for any kind of anomalies or incorrect selections. And then I'm going to go ahead and skip to the top. Once I get to the top, and actually wasn't all the way in the corner apparently. I'll go ahead and move over probably like to the middle. And if you're only zoomed in like one click, then this should help you go over the entire image, so you see everything, all the rays, depending on how slowly you're moving. If you sense that there are a lot of incorrect cells, then you might go a lot slower, but if you sensed earlier when editing the image that there weren't a lot of incorrect selections, then you're not going to go super slowly. You can also grab anything that you might not have noticed before. It's good to go over it a couple of times to catch things that you missed previously. So this step is a really good time to do that. So I'll go all the way down through this, just looking for things, sometimes clicking unnecessarily just because I'm used to it. ROXAS AI was a really big change compared to what we used to have to do. It's still a fantastic program, but we would spend like an hour on average, between a half hour and an hour maybe, on average on each image, and now we don't have to do that. So and most of it was deselecting incorrect cells in the rays. That was what I spent most of my time doing, so I'm used to clicking all over the place, and now I don't really have to do it very much. So yeah, you would go down and check all of these and then move all the way over to the left. You don't have to do this exactly the way I'm doing it, but it just helps you cover the entire image and make sure you get as many incorrect cell selections deleted as possible. And that's it. Usually this is around the time that you are winding down editing an image. All of these steps you don't have to go in the order that the video obviously like puts them in. Once you know what you have to do for an image, you have all the tasks in your brain. You don't have to do this in any kind of order, but it's good to kind of do it in an order for a while until you get really used to it and know what you need to get done for each image. But typically I save this one for last, especially after doing the delete lasso cells. I want to do that one first before I do the delete individual cells. I'm going to try to make this video with my daughter sitting next to me watching Gabby's dollhouse. So, yeah, so this video is just to show how to split cells if you encounter multi-cells. which this spike, I noticed as I was looking at boundaries and what boundaries needed to be corrected, that this one had a couple spikes going up, which is unusual. Usually it's going down. It was going up because these three cells were combined into one. So that's a good indicator that you might have multi-cells. This one hasn't been split. I split some over here, made a video earlier, and it didn't work. So this one's already been split, and then after I split them, I'll fix or correct the ring boundary. So what you want to do is click on the Split Merge Cells tool under Cell Editing. It tells you to use one or several splitting lines, which you can do. I like to hold down, kind of like when I'm using the Delete Lasso Cell tool. I'll start the line and hold down the left cursor until I let go, and then I'll click on the right cursor and it'll turn green. And that's just one line to split. In an old version of ROXAS, if you press done before OK, it would erase all of your work. I don't think it does that anymore, but just be aware of that when you're splitting cells, you need to go back and check on them to make sure that they were actually split. And it takes a minute, just like the Delete Lasso Cell tool. That was unusual. Yeah, so I tried to split that cell and it crashed Image Pro Plus. I don't know why. So I had to go back in and re-split the cell, but this is what it should look like after you split them. Still not sure if this sample is going to be really viable if it has a lot of these issues. Because it's not going to get, I'm afraid it won't get the correct reading for cell wall thickness. So we'll see. I'll have to ask Georg about it. But basically, I would actually end up deleting both of those. You'll just go through each ring. If there are a lot of these, if there are only one or two of these, don't really worry about it. It's fine. It wouldn't hurt to delete them, but it's really not a big deal if there are a couple of these. But if there are a lot of them, that's going to mess up the average and the measurements, so we don't want that to happen. And yeah, let's see if it crashes again. And you can see it's making the measurements down here, and it looks like it was good. We can go back up and check them just to be safe. Ha! It did not do that. So I pressed done and then OK. That is the order I did that in, and it did not work. So we're going to try this again. Try those three just to see. So I'm going to press OK and then done. Maybe. Okay, so it's still doing what it did in an older version of ROXAS. Press OK first and then done. If you press done before you press OK, it won't save the work that you did. So please be aware of that, because this is tedious work and you don't want to waste your time. So I came across this image and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to go through drawing missing cells. There are a couple of rings in this sample that need cells redrawn. I'm looking primarily, again, like I've said in other videos, at the last couple of rows of latewood cells, because that's what's most important to our research question for this project, but it might be different for other projects. In this case, I'll start with the simpler ring. We have a lot of latewood cells that are missing here, especially that very last row is super important, so maybe grabbing a couple of these. So what you're going to do is, and there are a couple of different ways to do this. You could draw it the same way that you encircle resin ducts. So hold down the left cursor and just draw it in and then right click. I don't know if I need to have use magic wand unclick to do this part. And this one's a little weirder. I don't like it as much, but instead of holding down the left cursor and drawing it and then right clicking, you click once. Actually, this is another issue that happens. So if you don't have use magic wand unclicked, you can only draw one cell at a time. So I have to press continue, allow that to become a cell, let it catch up with itself, unclick magic wand, then draw missing cells again. This gives some directions on different ways that you could do this. I'm going to move these out of the way so we can still get to these arrow bars. So again, you can just draw holding down the left cursor, right click, or find a good one for this one. And this one is where ROXAS detects the cell itself, which can go well or not, like that, or not. That one did not go well, which is why I don't like the click and let it figure it out on its own, but we'll try it again. So we click, and again, not the best one. So this is easier to do when the cell is really well defined. Obviously these are not as well defined because ROXAS didn't pick them up in the first place. And ROXAS AI is really great, so the fact that it didn't pick these up means they're already difficult to detect. So maybe not using the click and allowing it to figure out where the cell is by itself is probably not the best idea. So holding down the left cursor and drawing, and I'm going to have to go in and delete these as well that were misdrawn. So then we'll go into delete click cells, and that one actually separated from this one, so that's not so bad, but that one, and that one got into this other cell, so that's great. Another thing, which also happens when you're drawing with the lasso cell tool, if you're drawing a cell here and you accidentally grab another cell, that's going to become one big cell. So make sure that you stay away from other cell boundaries when you're drawing cells. So I'll go back to that one. That's a relatively, weirdly, a relatively easy fix. Then we have an issue like this one, this ring down here. This is a bit messier, as you can tell. ROXAS AI has gotten much better about being able to draw cells when we have this issue. According to Marina Fonti, these are paraffin crystals, so the paraffin in this sample didn't get completely cleared out or washed out with the xylol, so that's why we have these little crystals. Sometimes it gets combined with air bubbles, like right here. So some people might think these are air bubbles, they're paraffin crystals. At this point, or at this stage, it doesn't really matter anymore. They're troublesome and they give ROXAS a lot of issues. Whereas, like, for example, right here you have double cells, and then down in the late wood you have nothing, or you have these little flecks of selections that aren't comprised of the cell. There's also something, these might be, there's some air bubbles here that you can see. I don't know if these are all this black are air bubbles though. It seems like there's some sort of maybe blue stain or fungus or something. And maybe that's why this ring in particular is difficult, because again, ROXAS AI used to have, the earlier versions of ROXAS AI used to have a lot of issues with paraffin crystals, but now it can pretty much avoid them and it's not that big of a deal. So we will try drawing a couple here. Again, draw it by holding down the left cursor and then right clicking when you're done. We're not going to bother with trying to have it figure out where the cell is, because that will be a mess already. And you don't have to draw all of these. Here's an example of where you have a tiny one and you want to just engulf that and make a whole new cell. That'll just get rid of that one instead of having to delete it and then redraw it. Same with that one, same with this one. You don't have to redraw every single one of these. I mean, in a perfect world, that would be great, but as long as a lot of them are drawn, then, especially these that are kind of partial cells, so they don't mess up the measurements, then that's really what matters most, I think. Georg might have a different opinion, or a slightly different opinion, but I think I'm repeating what he would pretty much say as well. is that these are really important. They need to be redrawn, not every single one of them, because the outliers will be set aside once this image has been processed completely. But especially these late wood cells. I wouldn't really bother doing this with early wood cells, at least for our project. And then press done, and you have a whole bunch of much nicer looking cells. In this sample, I'm going to try to do this. It's Memorial Day. My kids are home. They'll probably hear me talking and come in here, so I'm going to try to do this really fast. But this is an example of a frost ring in Wood Anatomy, which, if it's just Matt watching, he knows this. But you can tell that it's a frost ring because the rays are bent. When they're bent, it means that these tracheids here, these cells, imploded or cavitated and collapsed in on themselves, which caused the rays to bend. So that's a telltale sign that this is a frost ring. And this is not a bad frost ring either. I just did one. I probably should have done the video on the bad one that I did in the earlier image today, but this one's pretty good to practice on. Basically, we don't want to keep any of these cells that are abnormal. So we're going to use, now you could go through and use the delete click cells tool. That's going to take a really long time, but if you want to, you can. I typically use this tool after I've used the lasso tool just to clean up anything I may have missed. It may also be a good idea to turn on your filled outlines instead of, or filled cells instead of the outlines of the cells. This will slow you down a little bit, but you'll be able to see them a little bit better. And make sure to zoom in when you're doing these as well, because it looked like a bunch of these cells from zoomed out were kind of joined together, and when you zoom in, it turns out they're not. So you want to get rid of any of these abnormally large cells, any that are within these rays. So I'll click on delete lasso cell, which will take a little bit longer because all of the cells are filled. And then I'll go in and lasso any abnormal parts, try to grab anything that's within the rays. You might also see cells, I'm not quite sure about why, but you'll sometimes see cells that are super lignified. They almost look like reaction wood. That could also be because of that's because of the frost ring, but it's just random ones out of nowhere that do that, and I thought that was interesting. So yeah, you just do this across the whole cell. It does sometimes turn in, or across the whole ring, it does sometimes turn into taking out an entire section of a ring. That's unfortunate, but that's just something that we have to do sometimes to get rid of these anomalies. Now this frost ring is done. It's been deselected. This is where you would want to go in and find any other anomalous cells that you don't want to be counted or measured. Once you are done with this image, there's not really anything that needs to be unclicked here. I'm just unclicking for funsies, but that is something you'll want to do when you go through these. Maybe that one. And you'll want to zoom in and make sure there aren't any cells that are kind of clumped together, like multi-cells. That happens a lot with frost rings, or in the cells or tracheas around the frost rings. And other than that, this one looks good. I might do a tougher one later, but this is a pretty good frost ring to start on. Sometimes you might come across anomalies that really can't be categorized. Like this is clearly a frost ring. This is the frost ring I used in the frost ring example. But if you scroll down a couple of rings, you come across this issue. It doesn't really look like a frost ring because none of the rays are bent. It could still be a frost ring, or what I suspect is that, because you start to see a little bit bending here. Sometimes frost rings don't occur throughout the entire ring. They only occur in parts of it, or that's what's theorized, that's what's been observed. It's the same with resin ducts. You might have traumatic resin ducts. You might have a blue ring, but it doesn't occur throughout the entire ring. In fact, traumatic resin ducts are thought to only occur in 1/5 of the ring on average. So this could be the beginnings of a frost ring that then develop as you were to go like further radially throughout like a cross section if we had that, which no, this is one of our living samples, so we wouldn't have that. But it still needs to be treated the same way as a frost ring. So I've already deleted parts of it right here. I probably need to delete a little bit more. And this is what I'm talking about with the earlier in the frost ring video about these super lignified tracheids that seem to pop up within frost rings that almost look like reaction wood, which probably are reaction wood. So you'll want to treat this the same way, and you'll notice that a really telltale sign there's something here that is an anomaly is that the ring boundary isn't drawn quite correctly, and that's because this issue is messing it up. So you'll want to go in with either one, the lasso cell if you feel like that's appropriate. And you'll end up deleting a lot of these in this first row, which kind of stinks if you're performing any kind of analyses on the first couple of earlywood vessel or earlywood tracheid rows. Although I only really hear of that happening in hardwoods, not so much in conifers. So you'll go in, especially right here where those rays seem to swell up. That's really indicative of a frost ring. Frost rings also have callus tissue, whereas other, I'm going to say anomalies like maybe a flood ring or something doesn't really have callus tissue form around it. That's what I'm assuming this is, or over here. And that's just what the literature has said so far. I don't think that actually anyone's really, or a lot of people have really looked at flood rings and conifers. It's mostly, again, in hardwoods. I think ballasteros might have. But just keep doing this until you feel that that anomaly has been adequately erased or deselected. And again, the lasso tool cell, or lasso cells tool is takes a little bit of time, so you can just assume that anything within these lassos are going to be deleted. Alright, so I don't know if I'm going to include this video that I'm recording right now. I usually make these in the evening after everyone's in bed, but I'm doing this one in the middle of the day because I was working on this image and I thought it would be important in case anyone came upon like an image like this. But if my dog barks or makes noise or someone knocks on my door like the mailman or something, or a plane tries to crash into my house like it did 10 seconds ago, then it might get kind of loud. But hopefully this will be worth it to show you a situation or scenario that you might see. Right now I am drawing ring boundaries, and you can tell from this image that these ring boundaries are curving because this is the pith right here. And an issue that I've run into the last few weeks is when these ring boundaries start to curve a lot, especially like that one right there. It becomes really difficult for ROXAS to understand that. Sometimes it'll have like the ring boundaries go off this way and they'll all join, like all of the ring boundaries from these rings will join up over here. It didn't used to do that. I don't know why it does now, or if it messes up anything. I'm assuming it doesn't, but sometimes it doesn't understand even when you draw it perfectly that is where it needs to go, and it'll get mad. If this is the case, where you just draw as many, so I'm drawing them down here and going up, draw as many ring boundaries as possible until the ring boundaries start to mess up. After you press update outlines, try to go 1 or 2 ring boundaries and then press update outline so you don't draw like 5 of them and then 4 of them don't work. So I'll give an example of this. Let's see, we'll draw one of these up here and see if it works. I'll leave that there. We'll draw this one, or maybe this one because it's shorter and won't take as much time. I don't know where it starts though. Yeah. So I'm going to zoom in a lot with this one. This is also an example. That's why I wanted to show this image specifically, because you're going to see this curvature a lot, but something I have noticed with the new version of ROXAS is that it does not like drawing ring boundaries when you run into reaction wood. In our case, since we're working on conifers, compression wood, the new ring boundary algorithms are fantastic. But when it comes to compression wood, the whole thing breaks down, which is understandable. It's difficult for even me when I'm going through it, so I'm zooming in. There's not really compression wood right here, but when I scroll down, you'll see more of it. It's difficult to delineate the boundaries between rings when you have compression wood. So we'll show that in a second as well. But when you draw them, ROXAS understands, at least with compression wood. Unlike sometimes with these really curvy, with a lot of curvature in these ring boundaries. So I'll exit out of that tool and then see what it does. So this worked for the most part, so that's great. It did appear kind of curve off. It used to just end right here. It doesn't do that anymore, and all of these that are going off of the top of the image, they're all going to conjoin up here. We'll see what happens with that, but if that happens for now, I'm assuming they know that that's happening in ROXAS when you have images where the ring boundary is going off the top of the image, where all the boundaries are conjoining, and if that happens, then that's fine right now. If not, if something happens where you're drawing a boundary like this, or I draw this boundary and it gets wonky and it won't, after I press update outlines and it goes off all over the place, just delete it and make a note in the Excel sheet that you couldn't draw a boundary past a certain year and what the year is that you ended on. So in this case, this one is supposed to end, of course it's gone. I don't know why this disappears when I'm trying to film this, but I think it's supposed to end in 1876. So I haven't written or drawn all of these yet, so it still says 1887. But if you get to 1878 and after that the boundaries don't want to cooperate, then just end it. Say I had to end at 1878, so we know what the start date is for that sample. After you have completed editing of an image, so the ring boundaries look good, inappropriate cells and anomalies are all deleted, and you put the outermost partial year in here and updated outline, so all the years should be lining up according to your Excel sheet. The second to last thing you're going to do is plot reference ring width series. Now, get this to pop up. I hate that it does this when I'm on here. Here we go. So what this does is it compares ring width measurements in ROXAS to your ring width measurements in Curvature. This requires that an RWL file be on your desktop, and that file will have all of the Curvature measurements in it, and that file will be provided by me. So if you look at my desktop, it's right here. It is given this name because that is the name that is in the settings that ROXAS is being told to look for on the desktop to compare these measurements to. If you forget that name, or if your name is something different, which it could be, that is just the name that is in my ROXAS. I tried to change it and I can't. I don't know if it was there before, but that is what's there now. So if you want to change it, or at least see what the name of the file needs to be when you put it on your desktop, go to Editing Options and Utilities, and then check Settings. Click on the Miscellaneous tab at the end, and then down here under Ring Width Reference File, it has the name of the file that it's supposed to look for. Georg probably know how to change it, change the name and get it to stick. I've tried doing it, it doesn't save, so I just don't bother with it. So we are going to click on plot reference RW series. It'll ask you if you want to compare this image to this first reference series, BTP1, which is just the first Engelmann spruce sample. Unless you're working in the first Engelmann spruce sample, you don't want to compare it to that one. So you say no, and then it'll give you the list that you'll scroll down. And this has all of the Engelmann spruce and all of the white bark pine. So every measurement for every series, all the measurements for every series on this project is going to be in one file, so that we don't have to like switch files or switch names in ROXAS. It's just all right there. You do have to scroll down. You'll find BTP37 because that's what the sample we're working in, and press OK, and then this graph or plot will pop up. The red is ROXAS, so that's the measurements coming from this image of the ring widths. And then it's comparing it to BTP37 in the RWL file, which are your measurements from Curvature. So that will extend this entire time span, whereas the red is just the span of years in this image. So it lines up pretty well. The R value is 0.99, which is great. Georg has warned that the R value isn't as important as these lines really matching up. This isn't really a big deal because it could be that we're just looking at a different part of the ring that might have been more narrow than what we measured in Curvature. But I still tend to look at the R value and record it somewhere. I usually put it in the Excel sheet with all the years that I have for each image, just to make sure I don't. I actually found last year that two samples were switched because I was looking at the R values and they were really bad for the entire an entire preview image. So 5 different ROXAS images were wrong, and that's how I was able to pinpoint that they were swapped. So it's good to acknowledge the R value, maybe record it and keep track of the R values for each of these, but this line is more important. So it lines up. R value is 0.99, so that's great. Once you create this plot, it will automatically, even without saving this or calculating output, it'll automatically pop up in your folder with all of these other files associated with this image. And so you can open it whenever you want and it'll show you exactly what we just populated. So even if it crashed, you still have this file or still have this image in here, this reference series image, so that's good. And that's all you really have to do. You do this for every image, record the R value if you need to, and just make sure everything lines up well. Last thing you'll want to do to be completely done with an image is to press Calculate Output. So you might want to change the editing options depending on if you plan to come back and continue editing this image. Right now, all of the images should be set or have the setting set to lumen area only being calculated when you press this button. The other option is cell wall and lumen. The way you change this is going into editing options and utilities, and they're down here. So yeah, cell, lumen only, or lumen and wall. I've already calculated and done this calculate output for this image, so that's why it's already set to lumen and wall, but it should usually be set to cell lumen only. The reason why that's important is cell lumen only, if that is what it's set to, it will calculate output really quickly, like 10 seconds, and then it's done. If you choose cell wall and lumen, it's going to take a bit longer. And you don't want to do that every time you exit an image if you plan to go back and work on it. You only want to choose cell wall and lumen when you are done editing the image and you don't plan to go back to it. So it's finalized. So that is what it's already set to, and then you will press Calculate Output. It'll always ask you every time you want to calculate output if the ring border of the atmosphere is still missing. Yes, I just always press yes. And then it'll start calculating everything that's needed from this image. Also, it's good, just in case, to always check your Excel sheet that populates from this calculating output, and that can be found, well, let's see, it's with all the files associated with this image. So it is right here, output. I always have problems finding it. It's calculating it right now, so it's probably going to get mad at me. But you'll go down to these tabs, you'll go under cells, and these are always, or at least for me, have always been 999. What you don't want to be 9999 is all of these columns right here. All of these need to be populated. If these are missing, then it didn't work. Sometimes even there might not be a cells tab, I believe, if you haven't run cell wall thickness on it at all. But all of these columns need to be here and need to be populated. Sometimes you might have one cell that says -999. It just couldn't populate for that specific row or that trait for one part of the year. Don't worry about it. If you have a lot of them, there's something up with your image. But that doesn't happen too often, and this looks really good. So after that, you should be done. This will take about, it could take as little as 5 minutes, it could take up to 20 minutes. It just depends on the image and what version of ROXAS you have and how fast your computer is. So after you have completed all of your edits for your images, and if you have not taken cell wall thickness measurements for your images in a sample yet, in a past video I do suggest going into the settings after you're done editing an individual image and changing the settings from cell lumen only to wall and lumen. In that case, you'll be taking cell wall thickness measurements for each individual image, which is possible. It takes a bit longer. It's a bit more tedious. It's also there's also an option if you have the latest version of ROXAS and there aren't any problems with your images. We're still running into having some troubleshooting issues with this option, but this option does exist if you want to try it. To get cell wall thickness measurements for an entire sample, so all of the images that are associated with one sample, or multiple samples I guess, but I do them one sample at a time because one sample can take several hours. And you've only gotten the cell lumen measurements and not the cell wall thickness measurements yet. What you can do is change the settings for all of the images all at once, which makes it a lot easier to do instead of having to go into settings every time and change it. And then batch recalculate and take all the cell wall thickness measurements for all of those images in that one sample all at once. It just, again, is going to take several hours. So the first thing you're going to do is click on Batch Change Settings. You can either select your files or select the target folder if you're doing an entire sample. Let's see, I just finished ADA, so I will go into here. Now I've already taken all the cell wall thickness measurements for this image, or for this sample, all these images, but I'm gonna just show you how to do this anyway. So I select all of them. I'll put in 26 here because that is the line in the ROXAS settings or the output that you want to change, and it should at the moment, if the setting is to cell lumen only, then that line in the Excel output will say 0. You want to change it to 1, which means wall and lumen. So that's already changed to 1. Bring it over here and then apply. Now this has already been applied again to these sample images, but it's going to reapply them anyway. This step takes, depending on how many Excel files you're changing, could take up to like 5 minutes, but it's usually this is the really quick step before the very long batch recalculate step. So I went ahead and paused the video, just waiting a few minutes so I didn't have to sit here awkwardly while this changed the settings for each of these output. But as you can see, it shows each one of them being changed. And then once it's completed, it'll tell you it's done. and how long it took. Going cancel. Now, so that was batch change settings. Now you'll go into batch recalculate. This is the very long step. Instead of grabbing the output Excel sheets because you're changing the settings, you will be grabbing the images themselves now. So you'll have to go back through each time. And all of the images that you edited that are in that folder will then populate into this window. And sometimes I select all of them. I actually don't think that's necessary. But this is 44. I would average that each image is going to take between 15 to 20 minutes. So if you have 44, I count that's a good 14 hours or something. I'm doing math at 2 or 3 in the morning, so something like that. So this step is really good to do when you're about to go to bed and you're done editing for the day, and letting it run all night. And then the next morning, hopefully, all of these should be completed and you'll have cell wall thickness measurements for each one. So after you're sure you've gotten all of these images, and you can clear these as well if you only want to do some of the images within a folder. But then once you're done with that, all you have to do is press recalculate. I'm not going to, because once you press it, getting out of it takes a really long time and it really makes ROXAS mad. So make sure you're completely ready, and then press recalculate, and then hopefully in 14 hours we'll have cell wall thickness measurements for each of these images. I would advise, if it's the first few times that you've done this, or if you've run into problems with this step before, this tool, that after this has run, you go back into all of the output Excel files and make sure that the cells are there. To do that, so you'll go into your file, and I like to just organize them by type so I can just get to all the Excel sheets right there all at once. And I'll open it up. There will be different tabs. The third tab is your cells tab. If you have not tried to take any kind of cell wall thickness or cell measurement at all, that tab might not even be there. So if it's not there, then you don't have anything for that image yet. But there should be a cells tab. Ignore this right here. But what you want to see populated with numbers are everything from a CWTBA down to TB2, or TB squared, technically. And if that's all populated, that's fine. If you see a couple of negative 999s, that's fine. It just kind of get a measurement for that specific area. Don't worry about it. If you see a lot of them, that probably isn't an issue with ROXAS. It's probably an issue with your image. You need to go in and clean it up a little bit better, or determine whether or not you need to be using that image at all in your measurements, because it might be an outlier. I've run that a couple of times, and redoing the batch recalculate or the cell wall thickness measurements does not improve it. But as long as you see all of these columns have been populated, if all of these columns, all of them have negative 999, like they're there, but all of these numbers are negative 999, then you do not have cell wall thickness measurements yet. I have run into problems with batch recalculate where I will run an entire sample. It says it's done. I'll go in, and 2/3 of the images in that folder will have populated numbers measurements, and the other third will have the negative 999 for all of them, even though it said that it had run it and it took the time to run it. And that happens sometimes. That's when you probably want to go in and just do them individually. You can go in and grab just those images and select them again, change the setting again, and batch recalculate again. But after a while, it's sometimes just easier to go in and do them individually in ROXAS.